in 2012, that can't be right. And we get the same treatment the pigs are getting now. So my message is pigs are us. We're not that better off than Portugal, Greece, Spain, and Ireland.
Can somebody explain there's this, I keep reading about this magic number of 90% debt to GDP. That there's this magic number that once you cross, we're at 84%. Once you pass, they're saying that we're going to hit 90%. Once you hit 90%, there's some sort of, I don't know, mathematical equation. Does this sound familiar? I've read about it over and over again.
I've definitely heard it too. But I mean, there are a lot of numbers that simply we don't know because they're in a deep, dark hole of unknown accounting. So
if we could be beyond that,
for sure.
Sure, the Japanese got up to 200% before the markets took fright, but we're not going to get that far. I mean, these numbers are in some ways rather arbitrary because what happens is all to do with the interest on your debt. If you're paying 3.5% on the debt, as the US is, broadly speaking now, you can ratchet up quite a lot of debt. But if that's happened to the Greeks, the markets say, no, wait a minute, we'd rather have 5.5 or 7.5%, then very quickly your debt starts to kill you. And that's what I'm most afraid of, Glenn. What worries me is that the cost of servicing this huge debt could suddenly spike upwards. And when that happens, of course, it starts to consume a larger and larger share of the budget. It goes from maybe 9% of total revenue to 25%. And then you are in the kind of fiscal crisis that we're seeing in Europe right now. I think that could happen in the United States this year.
I know Damon wants to ask you a question here, but I just have to ask you, is there any doubt in anybody's mind here that that's going to happen? I mean, these interest rates can't last. It's going to go up.
I don't think they can last because what you've got globally is right. What I think Neil is speaking to very well is that there's a demand for capital, real capital, on a planetary basis, on a global basis. China has it, Asia has it, we don't. We print money and self-deal, and so if countries need capital, like Greece, like Portugal, like Spain, like the U.S., we have 200 debt auctions per year. We all have to compete for capital. So rates can't stay where they are right now. Right. We could see a ratcheting up of interest rates, which could implode the bond market, which would be the debt market, which may be ultimately where this all winds up. If you can't pay the debt off, what do you inevitably have to do? You've got to write it off.
Then what happens?
Well, then you get a simultaneous write-down of global debt under a crisis.
Okay. The idea, and Brian, maybe you can help me with this. We seem to be the West is doing the same thing. We have been, while they were building the Statue of Liberty and painting Washington crossing the Delaware over in Europe to tell Europeans, be more like America, our leaders, our brainiacs, were going over to Germany and learning Marx and Nietzsche and everything else. We haven't been a true free market, a true free society in over 100 years. Nobody has. We keep being told, be more like Europe. Well, now we're like Europe.
Right. Yeah, the global trend does seem to be that the entire West is just going to end up this sort of static, low growth, boring, undynamic place like Europe actually is now. If you look at public sector union trends in the U.S. versus Europe, we are becoming more like them in a very alarming way. And the most alarming way that we may end up being like Europe is right now in Europe we're seeing that people are no longer interested in buying the bonds of countries like Portugal and Greece. And we're already seeing the Chinese showing a little less interest in buying our bonds. And then the whole game of, oh, we're just going to borrow and borrow and borrow to spend and spend and spend is over. That's going to be really unpleasant. But I think what's at the other end of it is going to be great, because then money and capital, instead of just being lent to governments to do what governments do with them, can actually be lent to entrepreneurs and people who are going to build real wealth for the world. And that's my hopeful vision.
David's shaking his head.
No, I don't see it that way. What I see is increasingly, look at Greece. Greece is the cradle of Western civilization. It's the cradle of democracy. I mean, what's at stake here, what's really at stake here, is the whole notion of the democratic system as it stands. The westernized system that we've exported all over the planet is in peril right now.
Sure. For over 110 years, we haven't done it.
We haven't done it. We've hit under the Democrats or the Republicans or the conservatives or the
progressives.
And
it's all
nothing has
progressive.
happened.
But no, it has all been, they have distorted it. It's all a progressive nightmare. It's not true freedom.
But here
true freedom, you tell me. And Neil, you're the guy who did the history of money. You tell me, what happened in 1920? We talked about it earlier this week on the program. Government got out of the way. We had a depression, and it rocketed back up.
Yeah, the 1920s really were the last time you could say that this was a pure free market system, because all the programs that we're familiar with today originated in the New Deal in the 1930s. And of course, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is an inspiration for President Obama. So we're kind of getting a New Deal, which I don't think is going to help matters in the slightest. The trouble is, I don't think we get to that optimistic outcome that we've been imagining here so easily. It's very painful indeed to get from a situation like this to a healthier free market situation. You either have to default on a large part of the debt, or you have to inflate it away. There really aren't many other options open to a country that has debts this size, and neither of those processes is really much fun. So I don't think that we easily get to back to the idyll of a true free market republic. The problem is the politicians, and this is, I know, one of your themes, Glenn. I see a consensus in Congress between Republican tax cutters and Democratic spenders to run deficits for the rest of time. That is the political consensus that has emerged in Washington. And what is completely lacking is a will to reform the U.S. tax system, to cut income tax, but to introduce some other tax on consumption that might actually help to balance the budget and simplify the whole system, because right now it's just a mass of poverty traps and distortions. And of course, the other thing that the politicians just don't want to touch are the entitlements which are bankrupting the country. Until those things are done, until there's a political leader that has the courage to spell out to Americans, we need to do this. We need to reform our system root and branch. Then I'm afraid we're going to slide downhill in the direction not just of European economics, but of Latin American economics.
Let me tell you something. I've never seen anything like this before in my life. I've watched America and talked to them. I've been in radio since I was 13. I know, I have a good sense of America. I have never, ever seen in my lifetime the willingness of the average American to say, I'll live like my grandparents did in the Great Depression. I will sacrifice if you promise that freedom will be at the other end for my children. Stop stealing the future from my children. They know. They're on to the game. They just need somebody to verify it for them, and then they'll do the hard thing. The question is, when we get back, A, what is the hard thing? And with what we see happening over in Europe, the coming insurrection, and the players that are involved, will you be allowed to do the hard thing? I'll get into one of my conspiracy theories, the one that everybody always says, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist. No. I just notice all the people that are involved. I'll talk to you about that on, are you going to be allowed to do the tough thing? Next. You know, I have to tell you, a lot of times people will say, you know, the lefty blogs will say, Glenn Beck is a conspiracy theorist. No, I'm not. I'm a student of history. If you don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past, learn history. And you would see it every time. We're back with Neil Ferguson, Damon Vickers, and Brian Doherty. And I want to start here. What gave me this theory was learning the real history of the end of the Soviet Union. The end of the Soviet Union, I think it was Boris Yeltsin, wasn't it? Yeltsin went out, and he went out into the woods, and he met with a lot of the leaders of what's now the Russian Republic, and said, look, this thing's going to collapse. Now, we can do this one of two ways. It can collapse, or we can fundamentally transform it. Went back into their version of Congress and said, you got 1 hour. Debate it. Transform it, or you're going to have blood in the streets. What's it going to be? They decided, transform it into the Russian Republic. Well, while we look at collapse and say, okay, there's problems, others also are. And I think that there are those who are looking at what this transforms into. I don't think this language of President Obama, I'm going to fundamentally transform America, I don't think that's a mistake. I don't think that's a coincidence. I'm wondering if, as there are in Europe with the unions. The unions, a lot of it is communist influence, et cetera, deep socialists. There's socialists running this republic over in Greece now. They're already making the decisions of what it's going to be, and it's going to be China. It's going to be a China light. I think that's the model that people are going for. Disagree or agree?
No, you know, it's scary to say that. It's scary to say that to America, that the model that the world may choose may ultimately look more like a China-style system. That's a scary thing to say to Americans.
Well, only because they're killing children in rice paddies, and I mean, it's an ugly system.